And both candidates talked about that on the campaign trail yesterday. Let's take a listen.
When you're governor, congressman, you're trying to solve problems, wherever you want a straight answer on something. The moment that really stuck out is I just asked the simplest of all questions that every single American should be able to answer. I asked him if Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He refused to answer. Understand, in that 88th minute last night, with that damning non-answer, Senator Vance made it clear he will always make a different choice than Mike Pence made. And as I said then, and I will say now, that should be absolutely disqualifying if you're asking to be the Vice President of the United States.
Here's the simple reason. The media is obsessed with talking about the election of 4 years ago. I'm focused on the election of 33 days from now because I want to throw Kamala Harris out of office and get back to common sense economic policies. But I also think you can believe that America needs to have secure and free elections, but also talk about the fact that just a couple of weeks ago, Democrats in the U.S. Congress blocked a piece of legislation that would have ensured illegal aliens don't vote in our elections. If you believe in American democracy, if you believe in our constitutional republic, you should be trying to strengthen American election integrity and not weaken it.
Michael Steele, I want your thoughts on this, and I'm curious. I really think Tim Walz defined the election, defined the choice in that moment during the debate. As much as you could see Vance trying to sane wash it, there's a lot of use of that word lately. But there are a swath of voters who are watching MAGA TV, whether it's Fox News, Newsmax, Rumble, or whatever else they have going on out there, and they're not hearing anything about this, or very little. I really feel like the Harris campaign needs to get into the arena. They need top surrogates on going on Fox News and going to these places and trying to talk to people. And I know that might be hard, and perhaps they're not welcome, but then tell us that. Right. I mean, we need to somehow get the entire conversation out there for all the American people to see, for all the American people to see the facts and the choice.
So let's just unpack this a couple of ways real quick. So the first part of this, you're right. I looked at that debate between Vance and Walz as two fighters in a ring going at each other. One fighter, Vance, for, out of a 10-round bout, for 9 rounds, was winning on points. Right? He was. The judges were impressed by the style, the movements. He landed some punches. He was winning on points. In the 10th round, the guy who's losing on points landed a knockout blow with one question, which utterly disqualified his opponent for the office that he's seeking. And that's a profound moment. And I think that moment will register and has registered with the 40+ million Americans who watched that debate. That part of that, what happened of that story, is what the campaign has to get out in front, and which they've begun to do almost immediately after that debate, with a very important ad, I think, that sort of clarifies that. That's one. Two, with respect to someone who's watching Fox or Newsmax or any of those stations, if that's their only source of news, there is nothing else we can say to them at this point. I don't think the Harris campaign can waste its time on convincing the unconvincible. What I think they need to look at are those voters out there who are sitting on the sidelines saying, I just don't know if I want to vote. And I think that's where their focus has to be, because those are the gettable voters. They're not necessarily going to be persuaded by that knockout punch. What you have to understand and get to is, what is the thing that's keeping them from getting in the ring with Governor Walz? And I think a lot of that has to do with the economy, and which is why what's happening with the longshoremen is so important. When we peel back that storyline and look at the relationship between, Mr. Daggett and the president, former president of the United States, and why now? And that you talk about October surprises, right? The planning around that, when there were people trying to get that resolved before we got to this point. So there are things that touch on the economy of people that they want to use as a reason for not speaking out and speaking on behalf of Walz and Harris. Then address that for them, because those are the voters you're going to need in those battleground states. The Fox viewer is not going to be moved by anything Kamala Harris has to say in the 34th day of the camp left in the campaign. But there are voters out there who are on the sidelines who are making the excuse for not getting in. So help them get over that excuse and give them the reason to get in the race, because that's where the richness of the vote lies for them.
We're going to dig into that dock workers strike a little bit more in just a bit. You're right, Michael. It could have a big impact as this drags on, if it does, for several more weeks. Chuck Rosenberg, to tie up a bit this filing from the special counsel yesterday, and just to look out ahead on where this goes from here. You touched on it briefly before, but the Trump team obviously gets a chance over the next couple of weeks to respond to the filing, and then the special counsel gets to respond to the response. So now you're basically at Halloween at that point. So in terms of an impact on the election, it doesn't look like there will be one, but where will this go from here as Judge Chutkan considers both sides of the argument about whether Donald Trump's actions were private or if he was acting in his role as president?
Oh, you're quite right, Willie. The Trump team will respond. They will argue that all of these things are actually official conduct and therefore immune, and therefore that the indictment in whole or in part ought to be dismissed. But I just want to touch on one other point about whether or not this constitutes election interference. A couple of points here that I think are important. Number one, this brief was not released by the Justice Department or by the president or by the Harris campaign. It was filed by the special counsel, and it was made public by a sitting federal district court judge. Number two, whether or not she released this redacted filing, she would be, at least in theory, accused of some political decision making. The decision to keep it sealed might be viewed as, on one side, as political. The decision to unseal it in part might be viewed on the other side as political. I think that Judge Chutkan simply did what judges do. She's moving her docket along. There is a strong preference in the federal courts to make documents public, because the public ought to be able to see what is happening in their courts. And so she did what judges do. She made the filing public. Again, either way, damned if you do, damned if you don't. You're accused of withholding something or filing something, then some people think you're acting politically. I don't view it that way. To your other point, Willie, this will take a while. You're not going to have an answer by October. There may even, by the end of October, and there may even be more appeals as Judge Chutkan tries to parse what remains of the indictment to determine what is in bounds and what is out of bounds, Willie.
All right. Former U.S. Attorney Chuck Rosenberg, thank you very much for coming on this morning.